Civilization has greatly benefited from man's infinite capacity for research and invention, a capacity that is all too frequently harnessed for the destruction of others. This project, which I've called Evilution, is my response as an artist to this evil phenomena. I have made a series of 5 panels, the names of which are synonymous with the destruction of innocent lives. They will be memorials to the millions of innocent victims, many of whom were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or from the wrong country or race. Every one of them meant something to someone and should not be forgotten. In my mid-60s, I began to recall images of my early childhood at the time of the London Blitz. These memories were probably prompted by conversations with my late father. In fact, one of my earliest memories is of him digging a huge hole in the back garden of our house. This was for an Anderson air raid shelter he needed to complete before being called for military service. When the Blitz started, thousands were killed in London, Coventry, Liverpool and Plymouth, something I only became aware of much later. I started writing these memories down, and the more I wrote, the more I remembered. I was much encouraged by my friend Janet Phillips. But I could not find a way of expressing these images in visual terms. However, my friend, the artist John Charles Clark, pointed out that my works were already heading in this direction by the use of discarded and broken materials. Then, in 2001, with millions of others around the world, I watched the devastating attack on the World Trade Center and knew that this too was an act of evolution. Working almost spontaneously, I made a large panel which looked like a chaotic mix of broken concrete, computer parts, wiring and cell phones, especially cell phones. I had now found the means with which to respond to the other acts of evolution. Research and visits to the Imperial War Museum enabled me to make a series, memorials to those who had perished at Coventry, Dresden, Hiroshima and Auschwitz. And like the 9/11 panel, they would incorporate related artefacts. I had been keeping a video diary, and it occurred to me that although I had finished one of the panels, I could bring a more personal response to the project if I visited each of the places. That decision did not prepare me for my visit to Auschwitz on a cold, grey November morning. Walking along that infamous railway track, I experienced the reality of the newsreels I had watched as a child. Here, day after day, thousands of exhausted, starving, humiliated and fearful men, women and children left those squalid cattle trucks after a nightmare journey across Europe. Those too old, too young or unfit for work went on a 20-minute walk to the gas chambers. My visit to Coventry was a reminder of the night in November 1940 when the Luftwaffe dropped 15,000 incendiary bombs and 500 tons of high explosive in a raid that left the city centre in ruins and thousands either homeless or dead. Many were buried in mass graves, and the surviving walls of St Michael's Cathedral are their memorial. In 1945, the beautiful city of Dresden was also reduced to ash and rubble after a firestorm created by 2 days of bombing by the Allies, and was later twinned with Coventry as an act of reconciliation. I am planning to visit Hiroshima, completely destroyed by the first ever use of an atomic weapon, in August 1945. and I will be accompanied by a Japanese man I met recently who survived in spite of horrendous burns. I have recently been to New York, and approaching Manhattan on the Staten Island ferry, it was strange to see that world-famous skyline without the iconic Twin Towers. At Ground Zero, rebuilding work was well underway, and looking up into the space where thousands had worked each day was a stark reminder of that dreadful event. And although the daily life of that vibrant city was returning to some sort of normality, St Paul's Church and the Tribute Centre still had the sad reminders of the human toll. In addition to the 9/11 panel, I will be making works which focus on two extraordinary men who became victims. Father Michael Judge was a charismatic Franciscan priest and a chaplain to the New York Fire Department. Rick Riscola was a Cornishman and a Vietnam War hero. As a security officer in the South Tower, he saved over 2,700 lives before losing his own. Two courageous men, each committed to the saving of lives, and each making the ultimate sacrifice in doing so. In preparation for phase 2 of my project, I recently visited the cemeteries and battlefields of Ypres in Belgium. Using letters, photos, documents and poems, I will be making works about the thousands of men from towns and villages up and down the country who gave their lives on the Western Front in the First World War. Local history and the history of my family will contribute to this phase. The panels were first exhibited at the Falmouth Art Gallery in the summer of 2008. They attracted people of all ages, some sharing their own or their family histories with me. They were installed in Truro Cathedral the following year, where they were the focal point for the 6 weeks of Lent, many spending time with them in reflection or prayer. And the unaccompanied performance of an anthem by the cathedral choir became the defining moment of the project, and the beginning of a spiritual journey for the panels. A journey that continued in the parish church of my hometown, St Ives. I was then honoured with an invitation to install them in the magnificent new Coventry Cathedral, where they would remain for the year commemorating the destruction of the city and the original cathedral in November 1940. During their time in Coventry, the panels were honoured yet again, with an invitation from Father Madigan to exhibit them in St Peter's Church near Ground Zero to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center in September 2001. A fundraising exhibition was organised at the Crypt Gallery in St Ives, and the panels were shipped to New York City. They were installed within sight of Ground Zero at St Peter's Church. The pipes and drums of the New York Fire Department's Emerald Society played on the steps of the church to welcome those attending the installation of the panels. Father Madigan welcomed everyone to his church and introduced Susan Riscola. Susan spoke of her husband Rick and the 343 firefighters and first responders who were killed that day. She spoke of honouring their memory and those who had worked tirelessly in the months that followed. In my address, I drew a parallel between the resilience of the people of New York City in 2001 and that of my parents' generation at the time of the Blitz during my childhood. In recognition of that bond and of the many friends I have now made in the United States, I gifted the 9/11 panel to the City of New York. The panels were then blessed by Father Madigan, and in the reception that followed, I met many people from the fire department and the first responders, and many whose lives were changed forever on that dreadful day. Following the reception, Susan and I were invited to climb aboard Engine 343, a vintage fire truck dedicated to the memory of the 343 firefighters who were killed. Accompanied by many friends, we made our way along busy New York streets to another reception at one of New York's famous Irish pubs. Over the next few hours, I met many more people from the city of New York, people to whom I had dedicated the 9/11 panel. And now, with the memorial pools completed, the 9/11 panel will become part of the permanent collection of the new National September the 11th Memorial Museum at the World Trade Center. My hope now is that wherever their journey takes them, the panels will continue to touch the hearts and minds of people and remind them that those millions of innocent victims of conflict, for many of whom there is no trace, should not be forgotten.